Hi everyone, greetings from County Clare in Ireland. My name is Dr. Gwen Moore and I'm going to share with you today research that I conducted on musical futures within the Irish context. So first I'm going to start by outlining the background and rationale to the study, the methodology, the findings, and then key takeaways that I hope you'll benefit from, whether you're a music teacher, or whether you're actually a researcher, or indeed a musician. So to start, a little bit of background about myself. So I work in initial teacher education, and I have done since 2006 at Immaculate College, which is in Limerick in Ireland. I also, in more recent years, took on a leadership role as Director of Teaching and Learning in the college. But before this, I worked as a secondary school music teacher, as an instrumental teacher, teaching guitar, both classical and also popular. And I also worked as a specialist teacher in primary schools. During this time, I also worked as a professional musician. So I've worn many different hats, and I hope that this brings a unique perspective to the whole area of musical futures. So I'm going to start now by looking at the genesis of musical futures. And I'm sure many of you will already be aware of this, but it's important to acknowledge it. So in 2002, Professor Lucy Green published a seminal text, How Popular Musicians Learn. And in this research, where she looked at the various practices of popular musicians, she brought key principles from this research into the school and published a subsequent book in 2008 entitled Music, Informal Learning and the School. And this was about, I guess, transforming and changing traditional pedagogical approaches in the classroom, while not necessarily replacing them or supplanting them, but actually introducing them as additional pedagogical approaches. And we know from here that Musical Futures was born. There are many different papers now on musical futures, and just some are highlighted here. But ultimately, Musical Futures has now, as we know, been adopted in many different countries, and it has been implemented in Canada, Australia, the UK, Ireland, and other jurisdictions now. But I want to focus in particular on the Irish context and how perhaps this is a little bit unique from its historical background and also from the perspective of me as researcher. So in the Irish context, because we have a strong tradition of Irish traditional music for many, many years now, many musicians are bimusical. That means that they can play by ear quite comfortably, and they can also sit in an orchestra and read a score quite comfortably. So this gives a unique perspective because not only can they play by ear, but they have both musical abilities or musicalities, as it were. And so in 2009, Downey published a paper examining this and the whole area of informal learning within pre-service or initial teacher education in her particular context. I then examined for my doctoral research and had the luxury of being supervised by Lucy Green for this research. I examined assumptions, values, and the backgrounds of students and lecturers in higher education. And what was interesting about this was that depending on the musical background of the student and possibly the lecturer, the experiences were often quite different. And also the curriculum sometimes depended on the experience of the lecturer, but also sometimes conflicted with the background, the musical background of the student. That's another day's presentation, and I'll highlight some of the references there if you'd like to read that further. John O'Flynn, in his book in 2009, The Irishness of Irish Music, highlights the broad gamut of music in Ireland that constitutes Irish music. And while we might associate Irish music being Irish traditional music, it's far more broad than that. And of course, we know that many famous rock and pop musicians have come from Ireland, such as U2, Enya, the Corrs, Sinead O'Connor, the Cranberries, the list goes on. So it would seem then that in the Irish context, Ireland was ripe for musical futures to take hold. And some could argue they didn't need musical futures, given that receptiveness to playing by ear already. So I want to look now at the primary school within the context of Ireland and also the secondary school. So similar to other countries, most primary schools have generalist teachers that teach all the subjects of the curriculum. And similar to other jurisdictions and contexts as well, there are issues in confidence in teaching music. At secondary level, specialist teachers are used mostly, or at least employed mostly. And the content in these contexts can depend on the teacher expertise and their background. And this can emanate from the bimusicality of the teachers and then the bimusicality of the students, or indeed, it can be predominantly Irish traditional or Western classical. It's unusual in the Irish context for music teachers at secondary level to come from popular music backgrounds, and that's simply because of the Teaching Council regulations that demand Western notation and musical skills and content. So they're there, but they're in the minority. So if we look at musical futures and some of the key, if you like, approaches that were used in this particular study, I just want to highlight 3 areas. We've just play, which was used in this study in the primary school context. It's much more structured and it's play along songs. Non-formal teaching, again, modeling musical skills, a little bit more structured. And then informal learning, better known as in at the deep end, and very much based on Lucy Green's approach from her book, Music Informal Learning and the School. And this, of course, was used in this research project as well. So I'm going to highlight some of the findings that emanated from teachers who had used these approaches in the classroom. So what were the research questions for the study? 3 key questions. And again, it's about enhancing what's already there, not necessarily trying to change or transform practice, but in a way enhance what teachers are already doing. So in what ways, if any, has the Musical Futures approach enhanced musical learning and teaching? To what extent did the Musical Futures approach enhance musical knowledge and skills? And I mean this from both the teacher and the student's perspective. To what extent did the Musical Futures approach enhance extra musical knowledge and skills? Now, in terms of the methodology, what was critical about this was an open consultation with stakeholders before embarking on recruiting participants. And this was really important because at the time, Musical Futures was already very famous. So it's really important to open the doors to those who wish to participate, but also to have very open and honest conversations and discussions around myths pertaining perhaps to musical futures within the teacher's context or their perception of what it would be, and also for them to encounter it directly and encounter musical futures in their own practice, so participating in workshops. So essentially the first step was to establish a network and to get teachers together to talk about this, to troubleshoot issues, to look at concerns they may have had, and then to workshop and experience it themselves. From there, to actually advertise the project and ask if they wanted to participate. The teachers then who wished to participate followed up within their own school contexts, sought agreement from leadership in their own schools, and then volunteered to participate. And from here, for me as researcher, the ethical considerations and guidelines were really critical. So I'd advise any researcher to bear these in mind. It's really important to ensure that from the very beginning, it's not just about ethical clearance, but it's also about the process of ethical guidelines, but also afterwards and at this point in time as well. So all of the research findings you'll hear from today were freely consented, volunteered by participants, had the permission of both parents and students giving their assent, whether they were 9 years old or whether they were 18 years old. And that's really important. In terms of the methods, there were multiple data gathering tools employed, including the teacher's own recorded audio and video recorded practice, which again, that's very important from the purpose of ethical considerations to seek permission and consent, both from GDPR reasons and also for research ethics. the interviews with teachers, focus groups with students, and also the analysis of that. That was ongoing as research data was being collected. And then the ongoing appraisal and consultation with teachers during the research analysis process, data analysis process, and also the sustainability for sustainability reasons. So if anybody is inquiring about this and wants to embark on it, I can definitely respond if you wish to contact me by email. But let's look now at the initial findings. So participants that volunteered, we had 2 primary schools, 2 secondary schools. It was really important that those who volunteered had the permission of the principals to proceed. And that wasn't simply because I had to seek permission again in terms of access to the school, but also for the actual music teachers themselves, that they felt confident that they had the support of senior management. In the primary schools, they used the Just Play resources. There were 2 schools involved, a rural 2-teacher school and also a DEIS school. Now, DEIS in Ireland stands for Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools. And so most of these schools are located within socially disadvantaged areas. So there was a DEIS school with, as you can see, children aged 10 to 12. And in this, the principal and teacher and pupils all participated in actually both primary schools. 2 secondary schools in 2 cities, Dublin and Cork, and you can see one is a boys' school and the other is a mixed comprehensive school. And in the boys' school, the teacher used the Just Play resources, whereas in the mixed comprehensive school, both Just Play and informal learning or in at the deep end was used. So in total, 6 teachers participated and 74 pupils. So it was a small scale study. Let's look now at some of the key findings. So I want to highlight some key areas of musical and extra musical skills. In the first instance, oral skills. So both teachers and students highlighted how oral skills have become heightened and enhanced because of the act of performing and listening at the same time. Musical elements, which, as we know, is often listed on the curriculum as something that teachers have to cover, arose incidentally from the pupils and the teachers as they embarked on performing and playing along with songs. A sense of ensemble came through very strongly. This sense of listening to one another, waiting for one another. And this, as you'll see, also transferred into the extra musical skills also. Skills of cooperation and leadership emerged from the pupils, where they realized that cooperation was really important. And then some students took on leadership roles, even though they weren't necessarily the most musically developed, or at least they didn't have as much musical experience, but nonetheless found leadership roles. Peer learning, friendships, and empathy came through very strongly. So the idea that pupils were showing one another how to play chords, they were also listening to one another, they were developing friendships as a result, and also empathy for, waiting for one another and understanding if somebody didn't come in on time. Learner autonomy emerged as well. The idea of students wanting to actually learn on their own at home to practice, and also increased confidence, both on the part of the pupils, but also on the part of the teachers. So some vignettes here and qualitative comments from the study. In terms of the musical elements and musical understanding, you can see here one of the pupils who says, you realize, like, when you're about to play, you realize more about the song. Like, oh, I didn't realize that chord was there. It shows how hard it is to actually make the song because you realize how it's been put together. So here we can see the pupil understanding the structure and also perhaps the harmonic nature of the song and also the texture. An understanding of the compositional process coming through there also. In one of the focus groups, some of the students again said here, like, I listen more to the background than the voice. And another pupil saying, whenever I listen to a song now, it's just like the harmony is always in there in my head and the instruments in the background. can see here one of the quotes from one of the groups, again around friendship. In our group, we are all friends now. So like we can just slow down if a person is going wrong and you can help them. One of the teachers focused and iterated perspective on inclusive pedagogy, where the approaches lent themselves to a whole class participation. And where the teacher says, like before, I would have brought in a song, I would have sat at the piano, and I would have expected them all to sing along with me. And then, if it appeared there was one good guitarist or one drummer, they would be given an instrument. It was only if a player was getting the lesson outside, he'd be handed the guitar, and the rest of them would be expected to sing along. Because I would have felt, there's no time to teach 24 individuals. But that didn't work because a voice is breaking and their confidence. Whereas this creates a space and the time very quickly for all of them to be performing. And in this context, which was the boys' secondary school, we can see that there's a more inclusive approach when Musical Futures is used in the classroom. So in relation to teacher confidence and the primary context, one of the teachers talked about, confidence and actually no real fear around making mistakes. Where the teacher says, I don't get the impression, oh no, I still don't know how to play that chord. Well, sometimes I still don't know how to play all of the chords, but I can ask the child beside me and it's fine. There's never, who played that awful note or who started out of time. And I think the children are feeling the same. It's good for them to have the teacher amongst them and all learning together, all setting off together on this journey. So that sense of learning alongside children and actually that sense of being a learner again, instilling confidence in this teacher's practice. Some practical and pedagogical considerations now for you, if you're considering embarking as a teacher using Musical Futures, and some of the key takeaways the teachers shared with me. The first one is the space. So sometimes space is difficult to negotiate in a school, and it may need some requests around swapping spaces or asking for particular spaces, and also for resources. So space as a resource, but also instrumental resources. So what I would recommend is that perhaps asking, and that this is what happened in this particular study, where in the schools and the local communities, the students and teachers asked among the communities if people would donate instruments for a short while. And actually, some families actually just gave the instruments to the school that they weren't using. So resources can be found. And also the setting up of ground rules. So the teachers mentioned that this was important from the point of view of settling expectations, the student expectations, but also their own, and that all were agreed that they had some sort of a contract, between pupil and teacher as to what was acceptable in terms of sound and noise levels, and also in terms of behavior. So that's important. The support of senior management can't be underestimated at all. This is really important. And simply because, when students are negotiating and they're discussing, it can come across like they're debating a particular song that they want to pick and choose, or who's playing a particular part. In addition, sound levels can be quite high, and the noise levels quite strong in a classroom. So senior management and colleagues need to be aware that this is natural, this is normal as part of the process of performing music. And I guess it's important to have that buy-in from the beginning, so there's a mutual understanding of what's going to come. In terms of the pedagogy, so teachers spoke about nurturing curiosity, and especially that playing by ear motivated students and enhanced their engagement. But again, it takes a different type of pedagogy, which is very much sometimes unstructured. While there's a structure to the lesson, sometimes there needs to be room for less didactic approaches, and that's really important if you're embarking on this. Students listening purposively to music and to peers takes time. But with that time comes a sense of ensemble. And so teachers iterated how patience is important, where sometimes you might expect results very fast. Sometimes you need to actually take time. And while the Just Play resources are really immediate and get everybody playing regardless, sometimes there can be hiccups, and that's okay, to allow students to just get on with it, to play and not to intervene too much. Extra musical skills came through very strongly when the pedagogical considerations are thought about. Students negotiating, taking turns, and then also leadership roles. And as a teacher, the teacher then, and similar to all of the research elsewhere, the role of the teacher fades into that of facilitator. Now, it's important that it's a guide on the side approach so that the guide doesn't disappear. So in other words, you are guiding the students and helping and maybe assisting them with the starting note or the first chord or whatever it might be. It's not about just throwing people into the deep end and leaving them to it. So that's important, to actually be able to strike a balance between not necessarily interfering too early, but do intervene if students are struggling so that they can actually get started. In conclusion, with this particular study, and if you're doing something similar as a researcher, you may find that, because it's something new and because it's very famous worldwide, there may be potential for bias. So it's important to mitigate against this and to acknowledge the warts and all that may come with the research and to include them, just like I've mentioned earlier. Also, to scale things up. So within the Irish context, I'm delighted now that I have a PhD student who's embarking on scaling up this research within primary schools in Ireland, and delighted that he has been awarded very prestigious funding to do this from the Irish Research Council. And that speaks volumes around attesting to the project and the importance of the project in the field of music education. Finally, the whole area of initial teacher education and teacher training can be looked at in this regard, and also further studies around how we build in informal learning and, I guess, that ability to play by ear within our courses in initial teacher education, so that students and teachers can continue this cycle of participatory learning and also playing by ear. And that's it for now. I do have references to come. Thank you for listening. And if you have any queries, please do send me an email, or indeed, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Gwen Moore Music. It's been great speaking with you today, and I hope that I'll see you all again very soon.